Hello and welcome to lesson 12, Breakfast with Jesus. We're finally getting down to the nitty gritty what this last unit has been about, where we've been going with this half study of John. Normally, when you do a book study, you study the whole book, but we started in like chapter 17 or 18. We're actually in John 21, 1 through 14. And the main idea, I've kind of been in a mystery to figure out what the writer was trying to pinpoint, but success is hearing and obeying God. Yeah, I think that's good. Maybe he's saying that Peter needed to follow through on what Jesus originally told him to do to be a disciple and make disciples. Maybe that's the point of it. Study aim was a little bit better to understand that success begins when we admit our failure. And that focuses a little bit more on the fact that Peter denied Jesus 3 times and goes back to fishing. Basically, is what the lesson shares with us today. And he thought that he was done. And Jesus goes out there and finds him and, tells him go back to work. And so Peter does. That's the beautiful thing about the unit is most people who fail in their faith never really come back. They kind of hang out on the sidelines. They don't fully engage. They have problems starting over. And, they just don't ever get back to where they were before. Here's some introduction to the lesson, some things that I thought about. First thing as I wrote on paper was finally, they're getting down to the point. We're getting there, finally. This is really what we've been marching towards. And today's lesson is kind of going to introduce the whole thing. But second thing I put on paper is this account is just unique to the book of John. There's so many things that are unique to the book of John. The wedding feast of Cana, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, the woman at the well, the visit with Nicodemus. So many things in John that are unique to the book. I was looking at the end of every one of the gospel accounts. I would encourage you to do that. It only takes a few moments. Matthew ends with Jesus giving the disciples the Great Commission on a mountaintop in Galilee. That's very different. You don't see that in other accounts. Mark's ending, it's, textually, you'll find that all of the book of Mark at the very end is in italics because what you find there's not even in earlier manuscripts. So it's kind of iffy. But that is a different ending. Luke ends with Jesus appearing to the disciples and like ascending into heaven. You don't see this upper room stuff very much of it. It's just different. So you'll find that most of these gospels have a very different beginning and a different ending. So Mark, every one of them is different. So John, this ending is unique to the book of John, is my point. We find this passage where the disciples are fishing on the Sea of Galilee. They love to stay at Peter's house in Capernaum. Jesus was rejected in Nazareth, which is in Galilee, and so most of his work was in the north, and most of it was around Capernaum. Beautiful, beautiful town. So when he was in Jerusalem, he probably stayed with Mary and Martha and Lazarus in Bethany. So they're fishing. Great, great thing to be doing. The focus of the chapter is on Peter and his restoration. And so, John is there. Other disciples are there. But the focus is on Peter. Peter has failed. He was the leader of the 12. He's failed miserably. As far as he's concerned, he's done. He's just going to go back to fishing. Well, Jesus hunts him down, restores him, and says, go back to work, dude. And he does. So I divided the chapter up into three different sections. 14 verses this time. That's more than we've been getting. I divided it up 1 through 3, where Peter goes fishing. They're out on the sea. I divided up 4 through 8, where Jesus appears on the seashore. And then 9 through 14, where Jesus serves the disciples breakfast. So let's go ahead and start this passage. So afterwards, Jesus appeared to his disciples, again to his disciples. So this is multiple appearances over 40 days, we know, by the Sea of Galilee. It seems like the other times have been in Jerusalem. Now the disciples are up in Galilee, probably 20 miles from Jerusalem. And it happened this way. Simon Peter, which this is the first time we've seen Simon Peter by name, Thomas, who's also Didymus, which last week's lesson was about, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going to go out to fish, Simon Peter told them. You know, he was a fisherman, probably a pretty good fisherman. We know he had servants and we had 2 houses, so he was not washed up when it came to fishing. He was pretty good. Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So let me give you a few thoughts. 7 of the original 11 are numbered here. That's how I counted it. I'm wondering if these are all the fishermen of the disciples. We know that a lot of them were fishermen, but not all of them. Matthew was a tax collector. So maybe these are the 7 that are inclined to fish together. Who knows? But we know James and John, sons of Zebedee. We know Peter was a fisherman. So here we go. There's 7 of them. Where are the other 4 that's still alive? Don't know. That's one thing we need to think about is it talks about the disciples being together. Well, which ones? Was it the 12? Was it disciples who were believers? Is it the larger group of all Christians? Need to think about that when you read the New Testament. These are 7 of the 11 that are left. So we don't see Matthew here. You know, maybe these are just the fisher guys. Remember that Jesus stayed on earth 40 days after the resurrection. So this thing is kind of getting close to the 40th day when we know he went up. And I think it's hilarious that it seems to me every time the disciples get in a boat, it's a negative experience. They either don't catch any fish or they get caught in a storm and they're scared to death. And let me tell you, when a fisherman gets in a boat and is scared of the weather, you better be afraid. And growing up on the coast in southeast Texas, it is easy to get in a storm, and it is a frightening experience. I've been up and down and around in a storm. I've had lightning out there so prevalent that my graphite rods would crackle, and it's like I am getting out of here. Fished bayfish in a huge Sabine Lake, and have had to get under oil rigs out there just to dodge lightning and try to stay dry, to let it pass. And normally they pass pretty quickly. But the Sea of Galilee was known for very violent, quick storms. And so one of those things. So they're out there and they're like, we're going fishing. So the second passage is early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Now it says later they were about 100 yards offshore. So they saw this guy standing out there. And he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. And he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Jesus always knew where the fish were, you know. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, this is John, it is the Lord. So finally, John recognizes this is Jesus standing on the shore. This may be a minor point, but I like the fact that they called him Lord. That's my name for Jesus, is Lord. Um, I I hear a lot of people talking about God, and almost like it's almost a generic name. My God is Jesus, and I call him Lord. Just me. So as soon as Simon Peter heard him say it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off. You know, these guys, most poor people only had two garments, an inner garment and an outer garment. We've got so many clothes in our closet can't even pull them out. It's so full they're wrinkled because we can't cram any more in there. We've got so much we don't know what to do with it. So much stuff. They only had two. Peter may have had more because he had a little bit more money. Matthew probably had a little bit more because he had money. But everybody else was poor. They only had two garments. So he took off his outer garment, jumped into the water. He's swimming to shore. It's almost like um, Forrest Gump, jumps off the shrimp boat and swims to the shore, Peter swims 100 yards to the shore. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far away, about 100 yards. So, interesting passage here. I think that Jesus knows they're discouraged. When you go fishing, you expect to catch fish, don't you? And they had been through a lot in the last month, and they're a little bit discouraged. And he says, "Why don't you cast your net on the other side?" Jesus always knows where the fish are. Okay, they were discouraged and they needed a catch, and so Jesus gave them that. One of the things that's interesting to me is it seems like they're using a net. He says, throw your net on the other side. I'm always interested, what kind of net is this? There's several kinds of nets, but to fish with a net, growing up in Southeast Texas, back when I used to bait fish, I use artificials now. Don't mess with bait, got to keep them alive, and I'd rather use artificial. You only catch game fish with artificials down there. Use bait fish, you're going to catch croakers and hardheads and any kind of fish that most of them you don't want to mess with. But we used to have a cast net. I used to. And there's an art to it. It's a big net, and you throw it out, and the rope is in the middle of it. It's kind of round, and when you let it sink, and there's anchors, the little weights around the edge of it, and you'd pull the rope in the middle and catch all shad and mullet, basically, finger mullet, and bait fish with that. And, I'm wondering what kind of net they used. Don't know, but it's like the thing was pretty large, and they throw it over on the other side of the boat, and they catch so many fish they can't haul it in, probably sink the boat. And there's so many, they don't put it in the boat, they just tow it to the bank. Let me tell you what, when you go fishing with Jesus, you always catch fish. So good for him. So interesting. What kind of net was it? I love it that Peter does not feel inhibited to not go to Jesus. I love this about this. This is not a broken relationship. Peter knows that Jesus loves him, even when he failed. And Peter, Jesus shows up, Peter recognizes him, and then Peter jumps over the side and goes to the Lord. That's how relationships should be, healthy, good relationships. Even when we fail, you start over. You forgive one another, and you move forward. That's one of the true strengths of my marriage. I got to tell you, you know, if we're a little put out with one another, the next day it's like it never happened, and you go forward, and you forgive one another, and you move forward like it didn't happen, and that's what's happening here with Jesus. So I love that. So from here, let's read the rest of the passage. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals, where with it fish was on it and some bread. Now, John seems in. We've seen other places where there's these coals and this fire. Remember with Peter uh, outside of the high priest home, and the servant girl accuses him of being a disciple, and Jesus denies him. So there seems to be kind of a link there. Other thing that I thought is interesting is fish and bread are a staple, and most people didn't have money to slaughter a sheep, you know, and eat a lamb, or any other beef or any other type meat. So they ate fish and they ate bread every day, almost every meal. You ever had fish for breakfast? I've had it once, and it was okay. You know, when we were boys, we were out fishing on a lake one day and spent the night, and we about froze to death out there. And we were catching fish and putting a stick through them and cooking them on the fire. Not the best way to do that, but it's a fun memory, anyways. Um, so, verse 10, Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've caught." So Simon Peter climbed back in the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish. Let me tell you what, fishermen count how many they caught. They had 153. That's a pretty good day, isn't it? But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. None of the disciples dared ask him that. So Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. So Jesus is actually serving them. He's modeling how they should treat one another. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. You know, I've been looking. Jesus' strongest words were for religious people of his day. Very strongly worded rebukes, woe to the Pharisees. He despised the way they treated people and how they treated one another, and he is modeling how his church should treat one another and treat other people. They're servants. They're not there to get rich off of one another like the people in the Sanhedrin did, the religious leaders of Jesus' day. They're to serve one another. You know, nobody's the number one, okay? We serve one another. We wash each other's feet. Well, let me give you some truths. First one is, even though we failed Jesus, he forgives us and acts like nothing happened. He cast our sins as far as the east is from the west. And even, it's like we're still carrying it around, but it's like when you ask for forgiveness more than once, he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. When he forgives you, he forgets. He moves on from it, which we can't seem to do. I love it that he shows up looking for his disciples, and Peter in particular. Second point is, he is there to redeem Peter, not to chastise Peter or the other disciples. They all failed Jesus, not just Peter. But Peter, because of his denial of Jesus, needs a little bit extra. He needs a little bit more conversation. I think what's so cool is all of the disciples did re-engage, including Peter. We know Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. He went back to being a disciple. He left the fishing. Last point, to be Christ-like, we must each work to help restore those who have failed the Lord and others. I want to encourage you this week, think about a Christian who has disengaged. for whatever reason, let's encourage them. Let's do our part to forgive them and help them to re-engage. Very, very difficult thing for them to do. But um, let's not be a source of discontentment for them. Let's welcome them. Okay. Let me pray with you. Jesus, we love you. We love each other. Thank you for blessing us like only you can. We all need open arms to be welcomed back into the faith. I pray that we would be ministers of reconciliation. In your name I pray. Amen. All right. God bless you. Have a great week.